And I guess we'll just go right into it. Taylor, I see that you're here. Thank you so much for being here. Clint, I will go ahead and introduce unless you had a plan.
Yeah, go right ahead. Go right ahead.
So we are really excited to hear from Taylor today about how participatory democracy kind of intersects with social justice efforts. And so I will let you take it away, Taylor, and I'll just kind of be on standby here because I know you have some breakout rooms and stuff like that you want to do, so I can help facilitate that whenever you just let me know. And I'm going to make you a co-host so you can share your screen.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Rebecca and Clint. Good morning, afternoon, evening, midday, wherever you are. I'm really happy to be here. Let me just start sharing my screen. All right, I've been having some tech weirdness this morning, so please holler if you feel that, something's lagging or not following along. I also don't have great Wi-Fi where I'm at. So yeah, just let me know if you can't see or hear me. Again, my name's Taylor Spratt. I'm a master's candidate at Florida International University. And I'm gonna say a little bit about me and my story a bit later, but just quickly to ground us, prior to COVID-19, I was helping high school in Florida launch their first PB process. That was an independent high school. And because of COVID-19, that project went on hold. They're waiting to be back together to do PB. I mean, largely because before this, there was no FirstRoot. It was very hard to figure out how to do it online. But I say that because the shift away from stepping into that supportive practitioner role has really led me to open up another space to think about this work that I do as an academic and as a practitioner. And think more expansively about the relationship between PB and participatory democracy and social justice, and something that I call the mural problem, which I'll get into in a little bit. I want to just acknowledge this sort of breadth of connections that I'm making in this work, connecting democratic pedagogy with feminist pedagogy, specifically Black feminist thoughts and the democratic possibilities it opens up there. And so I'll just be scratching the surface, but I'm really excited just to share some thoughts with you all. Quick agenda to frame our time. I'll talk briefly about the diffusion of participatory budgeting as a global policy and what that means for us as educators, speaking from my position in the US, get into what this mural problem vignette that I want to share with you all, how I'm thinking about feminist pedagogy is what I want to share there, thinking about this idea of caring democracy, what is a caring democracy, and then we'll close throughout. As Rebecca said, I hope we can chat a little bit. I won't ask you to come off mic more than twice, but feel free to use the chat and raise your hand. Would love to have a dialogue if folks are feeling energized and ready for that. All right, so starting off with the chat, you feel free to put in, won't be monitoring it very much, but wanna encourage everyone to use it. So if you see your region on this map from 2018, drop in the chat, show it, let's connect a little bit there. So the history of participatory budgeting. As we've heard in a few other sessions that I'm gonna build on and complement, PB emerged in Porto Alegre, Brazil in 1989 under the Workers' Party as a municipal policy framework. It was not actually used in schools or in education settings in Brazil. In the Workers' Party or the PT's original campaign for participatory budgeting, something I want to pull out for the purpose of our conversation is one of the basic principles outlined to guide the PB process included projects that especially aided the indignant, is the common translation, which we can understand as the equity component present in the first iteration of participatory budgeting there in southern Brazil. In 3 decades, PB has internationalized to over 7,000 cities, schools, universities, and public departments. Really, we don't know the true number because folks sometimes start a small process like we've seen in this conference, in a classroom or in a club. So really this number is always changing, shifting, growing, but we know that it's diffusing and diffusing fast. The other thing I want to note about this diffusion is in the literature, we see that as the policy traveled internationally, it became politically polyvalent. The PT was a very progressive party, a part of the radical left, but PB is not necessarily rooted in that political arena anymore. The policy can adapt to the politics of a particular area. And this is certainly a strength when we think about policy diffusion, but it's also something to trouble and to problematize as we think critically about it a little bit. Pape and Lerner wrote about PB Chicago, for example, that quote, "By the time PB arrived in the United States, some of its implementers still invoked social justice, but it was linked from progressive institutional projects, and instead became a part of the loose toolkit of ideas for innovative good governance, part of the fast policy transfer that Benny Peck has described characteristic of our era." Now, when it comes to PD in schools, in specific here in the US, we see this is just a partial growth pattern map that I have listed here from some of the PB in schools projects that I'm aware of. And we can see that it has grown really organically. I want to say here that PB, is inherently a pedagogical endeavor. We are learning to make decisions together as we practice a PB process. So it's been characterized by thick democratic participation, dialogue, and building coalitions. It's been referred to as a school of citizenship and a pedagogical-political project. As some other folks have said in other sessions, the literature shows that school-based participatory budgeting helps students build social capital, establish self-efficacy, and their identities as citizens rather than as future political actors. So students are able within the school setting to step into practicing citizenship rather than just learning about it, which is an aspect that many of us really love and appreciate about PB. And it makes it not surprising that in the global policy transfer of the last 3 decades, PB has found a very comfortable home in schools and has grown rapidly and spontaneously. Just to give a little bit of a global perspective, in some other countries, as well as cities here in the US, PB is a top-down mandate for all schools, such as in Portugal. Such was the case for a time in Dominican Republic, in St. Petersburg, Russia, in Phoenix and New York City here in the US. Some cities also have youth participatory budgeting at the municipal level, such as Paris, where 10% of a $100 million citywide PB process was dedicated to schools. And Boston has the Youth Lead the Change program, where they dedicated $1 million of the city's capital budget to youth PB processes. So that's a little bit about that there. Feel free to ask me more questions in the chat or later in email, as that was a very, very brief overview. But I share all that because I want to share a few. There are many lessons that we could take from PB in its original instantiation in Brazil, as well as PB processes from across the world. And we recognize that global diffusion doesn't mean that PB processes should or will be uniform across the globe. We have different communities with different needs, different access, abilities, etc. But with that being said, what lessons from Brazil should we consider taking forward into this global diffusion of PB? I want to offer here Bioki Ganuza's communicative and emancipatory dimensions. They identify and distinguish these two dimensions of PB in the original enactment in Brazil, and lay out these criteria that you see on the screen for evaluating PB processes. So first, let's just review. The communicative dimension has to do with the intensity of participation, who is participating in your PB process. This includes barriers to participation, including inclusivity, the inclusivity of not just participation, but deliberation, who is stepping up to have difficult conversations about the community's needs. And the democratic nature of deliberation. This includes the quality of decisions emanating from the process, if participants feel free to open debate, and the rules governing this discussion. In some communities, this looks like breaking down hierarchies and folks speaking more dialogically to leaders, for example, municipal or tribal leaders, that in other settings, that form of communication wouldn't happen. When we think about the emancipatory dimension, Bioki and Ganuza lay out the 4 interrelated criteria as the primacy of participatory forums. So these are the budget meetings where the citizen government communication takes place. The scope and importance of budget issues subject to PB processes. So are we voting on something that we feel is important and worth our time? The degree of actual participatory power over the budget. So are there institutionalized, direct, transparent links between participation and government action? And the self-regulating or autonomous aspect of participation. So are folks really able to step in to a citizen role from that autonomous factor. These are 2 complementary dimensions that I see as a linchpin to understanding PB and bringing it fully to new communities as an institutional project, because particularly the emancipatory dimension is able to restructure power relations that allows us to build trust and institutional capacity necessary to fully engage community priorities that emerge from the deliberation process. This also includes what early PB scholar Rebecca Aber calls a dual process of commitment building, whereby both the citizen and the state, or in many of our cases, the students and the school or the school board, are being motivated to support, take part in, and respect the PB experience, resulting in possibility for deep institutional change. This especially is the case when we think long-term about PB as an institutional project. Each budget cycle, the institution is responding to the needs of the stakeholders that is coming out through the deliberative process, through a deep implementation. Maybe this includes creating new budget lines, new positions, new services, new programs. As we've talked about in some other conversations this conference so far, when you're starting a PB process, using those capital funds is really, I'm losing my words, is recommended so that the participants of the PB process here, the students, are able to see a product, have it, for example, a new water fountain in the case of some high schools in the Phoenix area, and it's implemented, and we see the results of our hard-won democratic work, which is wonderful. But there is another dimension when we think long-term of how the school or school board or other type of institution is able to respond to all the really important information about how to make the schools more student-centered that comes out through this PB process. Now, I'll share a little bit about myself to break up some of the more theoretical orientation I threw at you, and open up a space for folks to also share about themselves. So my story about how I came to know, be passionate about, and curious about participatory budgeting. So this picture was taken when I worked at Dayton Public Schools. In very short summary, I was in a role of supporting recently resettled refugee high school students at a school that did not have an ELL program. And their first semester went so well that the district decided to house an ELL program at that high school because it was a comprehensive school. Therefore, students could access all the wonderful resources that that school had. In doing that, I was the lead facilitator of a youth participatory action research project, which is really the principle saying, what do the students think we need to make a successful launch of an ELL program? The Dayton Public Schools district is very concerned with welcoming frameworks, and so we wanted the student perspective about what a welcoming school was. It was an amazing experience. It really lit a fire within me. But the student group that stepped up to lead this process had no funds. There was no money attached to what the proposals that they ultimately brought forward to the school leadership. And that really engendered in me a lot of questions of what it means to be taking, especially in the case of a 100% Title I school with 100% African and African American student leadership group. What did it mean for me as facilitator to be walking these students down a road where they really invested and poured their heart into school improvements, and ideas were just kind of left hanging for the summer? As I was thinking about this experience, a friend told me about participatory budgeting. And it really caught my interest, and I spent a lot of time just reading and learning about different processes here in the US and globally, ultimately helping independent high school that I mentioned earlier start to think about how participatory budgeting could fit into their existing curriculum, as I think it's really important for PB to fit inside however the school is organizing their curriculums. So for that school, they had a Society and Me social studies 4-year framework that already is thinking about students as change makers and thinking about service. And so PB, we could then think about how PB asks students to do that together, to think about collective change and their roles as agents there. So that's a quick story about me. I would love to just break up some of the talking. Rebecca, if we could go into groups of 2 or 3, and just to invite you to introduce who you are, where you're coming from today, and how you came to PB. Do you have an aha moment that brought you here, a question that you're sitting with, something that really motivates you to continue to push for PB structures in our schools?
If it's okay with you, Taylor, I'd like to assign the people in the breakout rooms as opposed to randomly letting people pick or letting the system pick, partly because we have a group of people here who are the development team. Most of the development team is here. And I think it'd be more fun to organize the breakouts so that we don't inadvertently put all the developers in one room. So if that's okay with you? Yeah, and,
definitely. Thank you for bringing in what you know about who is here. However, I'll leave that to you and Rebecca's end. Thank you, Rebecca, for putting the question in the chat. We'll just use a few minutes.
Great. And then may I also assign you to a room?
Yes.
Okay, great. Great. Okay. So how many rooms do you want? 2 or 3?
Do 4 rooms because she wants 2 to 3 in a room.
Okay, 4
Yeah.
rooms. Okay, great.
So we can keep it shorter. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Um, uh, Fantastic. So the rooms are open. And how much time should I allocate to this?
Let's just let's try to stick for 5 minutes. 4 minutes. I know Karen and Sally, if we can switch rooms.
Yeah, I'm gonna see if I can, let's see,
There.
assign to the same room. So I'm gonna move Karen, Karen to room 2.
Awesome. Thanks, Luke.
Sure. Hey, John, we're in the middle of a breakout activity, so I'm gonna assign you into a room just for fun.
All right, everyone's filtering back in. Awesome. Wonderful. Well, thanks for everyone. It's always nice to get a chance to connect despite our Zoom fatigue. So let me go back to sharing my screen. I would encourage you to drop in the chat if there were some cool connections or new, unexpected pathways of folks finding PVs, interesting ahas, any of that. I'll continue on. All right, so as promised, the mural problem. In 2019, I went to Greater Phoenix, Arizona, and attended a convening of students, teachers, administrators, researchers, civic engagement advocates on a workshop of school-based participatory budgeting with a group of middle and high schoolers who all had done a PB process at least that year, if not for several years at their schools, as Phoenix is one of the birthplaces, if you will, of PB in schools in the US. A lot of the students that were present at that convening came from their school's respective steering committee for PBs. So meaning, as many of you know, they were the core planners and student leaders of the PB processes in their schools. It was a really awesome experience. Everyone is really, the room is full of enthusiasm for the transformative potential of PB, learning from each other what went well, what didn't, and trying to advance this PB project to really make changes in our schools. And amidst all of this enthusiasm, here were a group of middle schoolers expressing disappointment in their school's process and outcome. They felt that the winning project, which was a mural, missed the point of what they saw as the transformative potential of PB for their school. This is not to say that murals don't have really important space in our schools, in our communities, or can't be transformative in and of themselves. But to these student leaders, the possibilities for student power and for equity was lost in translation in the process of transferring the policy from the teacher leader to the steering committee, from the steering committee to the rest of the student body. And I think this is something that's really important lesson for schools and districts that are committed to PB and to civic opportunities for students and student leaders. They still run into these issues in policy language of decoupling participatory democracy and equity and social justice efforts in moving towards participatory school governance. Even when it looks like, and it may genuinely be seeking to do good. This is very much something that's rooted in the global educational policy environment that we're in right now, which has been characterized by hijacking of educational agendas by neoliberal rationalities and logics. They're quoting Koja Muljali, who's a really wonderful comparative education scholar. So as seen in this mural problem, loosely coupled SPB risks students feeling like this is maybe just a performance of their student power, and what should we learn from that? Well, one thing to problematize is the problem of the concentric circles of participation and how that affects the quality of deliberation that students are able to have in their schools when pursuing their PB processes. So you see in the middle, you have your steering committee, who's traditionally at the core of organizing the PB processes. The next circle is students who are involved by giving ideas. They're not in the steering committee, but they are early adopters and they're giving proposals. And then the last contributors. And so I just wanted to put this visual here to think about how each ring of students is thinking about and understanding what the possibilities for PB are, what skills they're learning when they're participating in PB, etc. Especially when we think about it as a school of citizenship, which participatory budgeting is often called in articles and in academic literature. But I want to ask for the end of my presentation, without a focus on social justice, it's who are we talking about democracy for? That's really what I've spent the last year thinking about, especially because Cushman, as I was sharing the high school, that's working on launching the first PB process in Florida. They're a school with a lot of students who have a lot of privilege. And so thinking about community issues is not necessarily something that you can jump into in the same way that I did at Dayton Public School and at Title I school. Every school community is, of course, different and has its own considerations to think about when thinking about equity and inclusion, right? So in pushing this line of thinking for myself and thinking about democracy to whom, I've turned to thinking about critical pedagogies, including feminist pedagogy, that can help bolster our understanding of what democratic education is in schools, especially with a more explicit commitment to justice and the recognition of pluralism. So I'd like to quote feminist pedagogue Catherine Weiler, quote, "Feminist pedagogies retain the vision of social justice and transformation that underlies liberatory pedagogies, but they find that their claim to universal truths and their assumptions of collective expertise of oppression do not adequately address the realities of their own confusing and often tension-filled classrooms." So in asking students not just to name alternatives and imagine a better world through the PB process, not just for themselves, but for their local communities within their school, outside the school walls, and in terms of global citizenship, I'd like to suggest that we ground in Black feminist thinking and the way that it situates democratic possibilities of intersectionality and solidarity. Quoting Patricia Hill Collins, "When we ground in ideas, in actions in groups like Black women, we really do approach universal and very important things, so we cannot ignore the particular." I find this to be something that's really interesting and important to think about when pushing ourselves as educators in thinking about participatory democracy. Moving away from liberal notions of thinking about one vote for yourself, we're thinking about not just a vague pluralism, but what can we learn from one particular group of students that will help all boats rise? And how will other students, in understanding that, increase the quality of deliberation and investment and buy-in in the ultimate projects that students vote on? So I share this as one potential answer to the mural problem. I think this furthers the project of another scholar writer that I want to shout out, Maxine Green, and her work, The Dialectics of Freedom, how we can have really position schools to become places for radical imagination of what democracy needs to be in the 21st century, to name alternatives, to imagine a better world, and share with others in a project of change. This political framework that PB offers, when coupled with Black feminist democratic pedagogies, moves closer to Maxine Green's hope that, in the words of Michelle Fine, we can imagine together a different tomorrow of ought, and might be making and remaking a public space of dialogue and possibility, which is really what I think one of my dreams for schools and school spaces of PB can be. I should have shared this earlier because I'm going to move kind of quickly, but I'll be happy to share resources after this is over. Just sort of mind mapping my own connections I've made in this process. And for the last couple of minutes, and then we can move into Q&A, I just want to break in another breakout room to think about these attributes. So Joan Tronto calls us to think about reimagining democracy along caring lines. If we're thinking about care work, both the care for students in schools and having student-centered learning, as well as care in all the other manifestation in our lives and societies. She calls us to think about 4 attributes to reimagine democracy around caring lines. Caring about, which is attentive, caring for, which is responsibility, caregiving, being competent in caregiving, and care receiving, being responsive in receiving care when we need it. So it'd be awesome just to split into 4 groups and each just spend a few minutes talking about how your assigned attribute can kind of nestle in or sit on top of or helps you think differently about PD process geared towards inclusion. And then we can come back, folks can bring their questions. If you would like to have one person share out any aha moments that your group has, we'd love to hear them. Rebecca and Luke, can we split into 4? I can drop the adjective that each group will use. Awesome.
Sure, I'm doing it right now.
Thank you.
And I backed you up, Taylor, with a note to each room from that one.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I was
Sure.
just about to put them in each. Okay, it looks told I'm unstable, so I'm going to turn my video off and I'll just hop between a few.
Sure.
And then, you know, I was hoping folks could have a few minutes because I know hour to hour to hour is so tough, but also there's so much to discuss. So
There's no way around it. We're so happy. I'll give everyone 3 minutes and 30 seconds from now.
awesome.
Is it just you and me here still? I think it's just you and me, Taylor. All right.
All right, I think we have most everyone back.
That was a good breakout, Taylor. Thank you for that one.
I'm so happy you, because I know I left you all. There's never enough time. And so I would love to hear a little bit if you have any ahas to share, Jeff.
I had a pretty good aha, you know, that Jeff, you know, was able to kind of walk me through, because, you know, I've been really wrestling with this question of, you know, the difference between care about and the caregiver, and actually this, you know, this interesting, you know, the separation of these concepts. And so, you know, when we think about care about, you know, and care for, and then caregiving, it almost can be, you know, you can almost represent that hierarchically, right? In a sense where, you know, when you care about something so much that you take action, now you become, you know, a caregiver in a sense. But Jeff pointed out that it's not necessarily about how much you care about something. You know, a lot of times in life, there is a component of prioritization, and there's an, you know, economic prioritization, you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs comes in, right? And so when we look at, you know, this hierarchy, and I don't necessarily know if you meant for it to be representative of hierarchy, but from someone going from caring about all the way into being a caregiver, it's important to reflect on the fact that just because individuals or groups may not be willing to, you know, participate in the caregiving does not necessarily mean that they are not active participants of those who care or care about something. So that was interesting for me.
Awesome, thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, just to quickly respond, it's not presented as a hierarchy, but rather the different parts of this idea of caring well. So this is the theorist Joan C. Tronto again, and she's coming from the assertion that we need a democratic process of assessing and meeting care needs. How, you know, to the questions that you're asking, how do we care for each other? How do we prioritize needs? How, in the case of PB in schools, of making it, you know, a safe and engaging learning environment. And it's also something else I'll offer that I thought a lot about when working with the independent school, and thinking about how PB can complement their existing curriculum, especially thinking about what students are thinking about our problems, or what needs to be cared for when they're in a position where their school needs are met. For example, they don't need new textbooks. PB in schools can be so many different things. The concept of sociable curiosity I found very interesting, and I can include that in my pool of resources to share with anyone who would like them. And that's being curious about and being curious with, which I think is another interesting way of thinking about a similar idea. Being curious about what other people need and being curious with them in co-creating our needs. Is there anyone else that would like to comment on that activity, or just open the Q&A space?
Yeah, Taylor, I thought the last one, the what was it, care received? What was the I want to get the term right.
Yes, care receiving.
Care received and responsiveness, I think, is the most tricky. I think it's also one that tends to get forgotten, and I just don't really believe that most folks do things for, quote, free. I think there's always some sort of response, right? Be it we want the thank you card or the emotional gratitude or some sort of receipt that encourages us to continue to give. And I think that's why you see, if one has kids or relatives with a medical condition where perhaps the receipt of care is not given, it's hard to maintain that sort of giving. And I think that's one that needs to sometimes get brought up a lot more. Of these, I think that is perhaps one of the most important one, is the gratitude that it encourages more care about, more caring for, and more caregiving. It's an interesting loop.
Yes, thank you so much for that reflection. As you'll see on the slide now, something I just wanted to share, what I'm thinking about in the sort of the theoretical work that I'm rooted in. This work has all led me personally to think about what is the relationship between participation and care. Where are they in tension, and where do they strengthen each other? So yeah, thanks so much for that, Jeff. If anyone else wants to drop a question in the chat or here, I come off mute. We have 6 more minutes to discuss. I know I threw a lot at you all, but I'm really grateful for the opportunity.
Taylor, have you found anything showing kind of that reflection loop or the reward element of seeing the receipt of care or the care receiving, and how that drives further giving?
That's what I'm trying to figure out now. So that's exactly the question that I'm asking and looking through the literature about. I think something I do think is important to note is, I'm not suggesting students don't care about issues in their school, or that we. Certainly, I think, folks like Nell Noddings would say we could teach care more in school, and I agree with her. But thinking about how caring can operate as a structure, or can be more structuralized to help us, in this case, figure out how to fit it in with PB. So I'll drop one booklet that has been really instructive. It's actually where the Caring Democracy components came from, in the chat, as well as, like I said, I'll put together some other resources, but I think it's a pretty, there's not a lot there. It's a connection that a lot of people are making now, especially when we think about the crisis of care that we're in, when folks talk about teachers, childcare workers, folks who work with elderly folks in hospice. So there's a lot of different dimensions to that this is currently being addressed in. That's a partial answer.
I'm just going to add, I really loved the talk. I would say the only thing that I think is challenging for our field as a collective field is, honestly, Taylor, I think that you underreported probably by an order of magnitude the number of schools that are involved in participatory budgeting. We've dug at this, and we find more and more and more schools doing this than is previously first thought. And I don't know if that problem is going to quote unquote get solved, because schools can do it just by doing it and not reporting it. But we found just so many different places doing PB. And if we were going to underreport something, it's not a bad problem to have. Meaning, it's not a bad problem to have the idea that there's a lot of people doing this, even more than we realize, which is really exciting.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. It's completely true. Thinking about the different permutations and ways that folks can get PB started in their school, even without the support of a school board, just starting in classrooms and all of that. Definitely the graphic just was to show the sort of quick growth, not to capture all of the schools, but also, thinking about this, how fast things are growing, how quickly folks are adopting PB. My mind always returns to this question of what are the sort of non-negotiables. What is the container that PB must be? And then what are all the other components for a given school, the capacity, the community, the diversity, the issues, the needs that any PB iteration can use and deal with. I really quick we'll just move to the next slide. Again, I'll share with Rebecca to share out with folks. These are just like a few other more technical rather than theoretical resources for folks that do come from largely from the work of Black feminists, thinking about, creative reaction labs, equity-centered community design, and how, for example, social studies class can think about this resource and helping students think about what PB can be more broadly, systems mapping, emergent strategy, a lot of different tools that can help connect the skills of PB to other curricular skills. And again, some references that I'll share. Here's my email at the bottom. Please feel free to reach out for resources, questions, just to have a conversation, schedule a phone call. Thank you, Luke and Rebecca. I see we're at the hour. It's been really a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Taylor. I will be making any of the resources that Taylor shares with me. I will make them available on Relo for everybody. Thank you so much, Taylor. I loved that breakout session and wish it could have been longer, because I feel like we could have really dived into that a lot more. So thank you.
Yes, me too. And that's another thing you can email about any feedback. I would really love it. Those words are really kind. I'll stay in.
All right.